Republicans in the Senate have killed a resolution that would have put limits on President Trump's ability to take action in Venezuela. 5 Republicans had broken rank last week to advance a war powers measure, many concerned about the possibility President Trump would order troops on the ground in Venezuela. One of those senators, Missouri's Josh Hawley, spoke before the vote about what changed his mind.
I've had multiple very substantive discussions on this issue over the last 5 days. And, what the administration told me all the time was, they said, we think that this ties our hands. And I said, my concern is ground troops in Venezuela without congressional authorization. And they said, well, we don't want to do that.
CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian joins me now. Nicole, how did this play out?
Well, it played out with the vice president, J.D. Vance, having to break a tie here. Obviously, this was a very close vote, and rightly so. Obviously, there were passions on both sides of this issue in terms of Senator Tim Kaine, the Virginia senator who introduced this resolution.
The death of the American Republic did not arrive with the sound of gunfire or the crash of shattered glass. It did not announce itself with a military parade down Pennsylvania Avenue or the suspension of habeas corpus in a midnight press conference. It arrived on a Tuesday evening in the sterile, air-conditioned silence of the United States Senate, buried under the dull thud of a procedural gavel. What we witnessed this week was not legislation, it was a crime scene. We are looking at the autopsy of a failed congressional revolt, a fleeting moment where the immune system of our democracy tried to fight off an infection, only to be suppressed, sedated, and ultimately destroyed by the very people sworn to protect it. The subject on the table was Venezuela. But let me be crystal clear. Venezuela is just the geography. The real battlefield is the separation of powers, and the casualty is the Constitution of the United States. To understand the magnitude of this betrayal, we have to strip away the cable news Chiron noise and look at the raw mechanics of what just happened. Donald Trump, in the second term of a presidency that has already shattered every norm of executive restraint, authorized a kinetic military operation in Venezuela. He did not consult the Gang of Eight. He did not seek a declaration of war. He did not even offer the courtesy of a briefing to the relevant oversight committees until the boots were already on the ground and the missiles were already in the air. This was a unilateral act of war initiated by a single man. In any functioning constitutional era, this would be an immediate trigger for a showdown between Article 1 and Article 2. And for a brief, hallucinated moment, it looked like that showdown was actually going to happen. For exactly 48 hours, we lived in a country where checks and balances were not just a theory in a dusty textbook. A bipartisan coalition formed. This is unheard of in the MAGA era. We saw Democrats naturally filing a war powers resolution to reclaim their constitutional authority, but they weren't alone. And this is the detail that sent shockwaves through the West Wing. 5 Republican senators, members of the president's own party, men who have spent years kissing the ring and bending the knee, broke ranks. Senators like Todd Young and Josh Hawley, figures who have built their careers on the architecture of Trumpism, looked at the Venezuela operation and blinked. They realized that a president with the unchecked power to start wars is not a president. He is a king. And so they voted yes. They voted to advance a resolution that would force the withdrawal of U.S. forces unless Congress explicitly authorized the war. The resolution passed the procedural hurdle. The headlines flashed. The guardrails, we were told, were holding. The system was working. But that was the illusion. What followed was a masterclass in authoritarian consolidation and the absolute moral liquidation of the Republican Party. Between the initial vote to advance the resolution and the final vote to enact it, something happened. The phone lines between the White House residence and the Senate cloakroom began to glow white-hot. We don't need the call logs to know what was said. We know the leverage Donald Trump holds, and we know he wields it like a blunt instrument. This wasn't a debate about national security interests in South America. This wasn't a nuanced discussion about the Monroe Doctrine or the stability of the Maduro regime. This was a hostage negotiation. Donald Trump looked at the 5 defectors and he gave them a binary choice, falling in line or political execution. He didn't argue the merits of the war. He threatened their futures. He threatened to primary them. He threatened to turn the fire hose of his base against them, to brand them as traitors, to effectively end their careers before the next sunrise. He weaponized his approval ratings to strangle the conscience of the legislative branch. And it worked. It worked with terrifying speed. The same senators who had stood on the floor days earlier, speaking gravely about constitutional prerogative and the need for oversight, suddenly went mute. When the final procedural vote came, the vote to table the measure, to kill it, to bury it so deep it would never see the light of day, Senators Hawley and Young flipped. They didn't just change their minds, they capitulated. They surrendered their branch of government to the executive. This is the forensic evidence of a broken system. When a legislature is too terrified of the executive to enforce its own laws, you no longer have a republic. You have a rubber stamp regime. The War Powers Resolution of 1973 was written specifically for this nightmare scenario. It was drafted in the shadow of Vietnam and Nixon's secret bombings of Cambodia, designed to ensure that no single American president could drag the nation into prolonged conflict without the consent of the people's representatives. By killing this resolution, the Senate didn't just approve a mission in Venezuela, they set a precedent that Donald Trump or any future authoritarian can initiate combat anywhere, at any time, for any reason, without asking permission from anyone. They handed him the sword and they threw away the shield. But why? Why does this specific surrender matter more than the dozens of others we've cataloged over the last few years? It matters because of the fear that drove it. If you look closely at the frantic energy coming out of the White House, you realize that Donald Trump is not operating from a position of strength. He is operating from a position of profound existential terror. The president is currently engaging in a psychological projection campaign that is as transparent as it is desperate. He is telling anyone who will listen, donors, senators, rallies, that if Republicans lose control of Congress in the 2026 midterms, he will be impeached. He is right, and that admission is the most damaging piece of evidence against him. Think about what that means. A president who believes his actions are lawful, who believes his conduct is within the bounds of the Constitution, does not campaign on the fear of impeachment. An innocent man does not scream that the police are coming. Donald Trump is explicitly connecting his political survival to the suppression of congressional oversight. He is admitting out loud that the only thing standing between him and removal from office is a partisan firewall. He knows that his actions in Venezuela are illegal. He knows that his weaponization of the Justice Department is impeachable. He knows that his obstruction of justice is chronic. He is terrified because he understands the math. If the Democrats take the House, the articles of impeachment are not a possibility. They are a certainty. There are already drafts circulating. There are already 140 members ready to sign their names. The Venezuela operation is just the latest article in a growing indictment. But the real nightmare for Trump, the scenario that keeps him up at night pacing the residence, is the Senate. He knows that his grip is slipping. The fact that 5 Republicans initially broke ranks on Venezuela proves that the loyalty is not absolute. It is transactional. It is based on fear. If the political winds shift, if the base begins to fracture, if the midterms deliver a rebuke, those senators who flipped today could flip back tomorrow. They are not protecting him because they love him. They are protecting him because they fear him. And fear is a finite resource. This is why the 2026 midterms have ceased to be a normal election. They have transformed into a referendum on the rule of law itself. Trump is framing the election as a protection racket. Vote for me, or they will come for me. He is asking the American people to become accomplices in his obstruction. He is demanding a mandate not for policy, but for immunity. He needs a Republican Congress the way a fugitive needs a safe house. Without it, he is exposed to the elements of the legal system he has spent a lifetime trying to dismantle. The Venezuela betrayal acts as a microcosm for the entire Trump presidency. It follows a distinct, predictable, and devastating pattern. First, the transgression, an illegal act committed in plain sight. Second, the shock. The system momentarily recoils and attempts to correct. Third, the intimidation, the counterattack against the institutions. And finally, the submission, the collapse of the guardrails. We saw it with the first impeachment. We saw it with the second. And now we are seeing it with war powers. The legislative branch has been conditioned like a beaten dog to roll over whenever the master raises his voice. The consequences of this failed revolt extend far beyond Caracas or Washington. We are signaling to the world that the United States military is now the private enforcement arm of the executive branch. We are signaling that the American people, through their representatives, have no say in how their blood and treasure are spent. When Senators Young and Hawley killed that resolution, they didn't just save Trump from a political embarrassment, they drove a stake through the heart of Article 1. They validated the unitary executive theory in its most extreme cancerous form, the idea that the president is not an officer of the government, but the government itself. We are watching the normalization of the abnormal. We are watching the institutionalization of cowardice. The danger is not just that Trump is doing these things. The danger is that the mechanisms designed to stop him are rusting shut. The gears of democracy are being stripped. Every time Congress fails to act, the precedent hardens. It becomes case law. It becomes history. They didn't stop him then, so they can't stop him now. That is the logic of the slide into authoritarianism. It is a one-way ratchet. And yet, in his desperation, Trump has revealed his soft underbelly. The frenzied threats, the late-night calls, the obsession with the midterms. These are not the actions of a man who feels secure. These are the actions of a man who knows he is walking on a tightrope over a canyon. He knows that the moment he loses the gavel in the House or the Senate, the subpoena cannon fires. He knows that the moment the oversight hearings begin, the narrative control ends. He knows that the Venezuela operation, if investigated under oath, could be the thread that unravels the entire sweater. The betrayal regarding Venezuela was a tactical victory for Trump, but a strategic disaster for the Republican Party. It exposed them as wholly subservient, stripping away any lingering pretense of independence. They own this war now. They own the precedent, and they own the corruption that fueled the decision. They have tied themselves to the mast of a sinking ship, hoping that the captain can shout loud enough to calm the storm. We are standing at the precipice. The checks are gone. The balances are gone. The only thing left is the calendar. We are racing toward a midterm election that will determine whether this experiment in self-government continues or if it is formally replaced by a system of personality-driven rule. The failed revolt in Congress was the last gasp of the old order. What comes next is entirely up to the electorate. The senators have made their choice. They chose safety over duty. They chose the party over the country. They chose the king over the Constitution. Now the question turns to you. The silence in that chamber is deafening, but it is not final. The story of this betrayal is being written in real time, and the ink is still wet. But ink dries fast, and once it does, history is set. We are watching the deliberate dismantling of the machinery of accountability. If you are not paying attention to the procedural violence happening on the Senate floor, you are missing the actual coup. It isn't happening with tanks. It's happening with yay and nay votes that silence the law. Do not let the complexity of parliamentary procedure bore you into submission. That is what they are counting on. They are counting on you tuning out. They are counting on the distraction. They want you to look at the chaotic map of Venezuela so you don't look at the empty seat of democracy in Washington. We cannot afford to blink. We cannot afford to look away. If you value the unfiltered forensic truth about what is happening to your government, the kind of truth that doesn't get sanitized by corporate boardrooms or watered down for both sides' neutrality, then you need to be here. We are building a fortress of vigilance, and we need every set of eyes we can get. Do not let them control the narrative. Hit the subscribe button not because it helps us, but because it arms you. Join us, stay alert, and never let them tell you this is normal. And yet, despite this capitulation, despite the Republican Party bending its spine to accommodate the whims of a despot, the mood inside the White House is not one of triumph. It is one of terror. Because Donald Trump, for all his bluster, possesses the primal instinct of a cornered animal. He understands exactly how close he came to the precipice tonight. The capitulation of Senators Hawley and Young was not a sign of loyalty. It was a sign of coercion. It required the President of the United States to personally intervene, to twist arms, and to threaten political annihilation just to stop his own party from upholding the law. That is not the behavior of a leader secure in his mandate. That is the behavior of a fugitive hiding behind a human shield of compromised legislators. The reality, which the mainstream media is too polite to articulate, is that the president knows his immunity is entirely dependent on a simple electoral math equation. He is looking at the calendar, specifically at November 2026, and he sees his own expiration date. The rhetoric coming out of Mar-a-Lago has shifted. He is no longer campaigning on the economy, or the border, or the culture war. He is campaigning on his own criminal liability. He is explicitly telling Republican donors and voters that if they lose the House or the Senate in the midterms, he will be impeached. And for the first time in his life, he is telling the absolute, unvarnished truth. This is a confession masquerading as a campaign slogan. By admitting that a Democratic Congress guarantees his impeachment, Donald Trump is implicitly acknowledging that his conduct is impeachable. He is admitting that the only thing standing between him and removal from office is not the law, not the facts, and certainly not his innocence. It is the raw political power of a complicit majority. He has turned the 2026 midterms into a referendum on his right to violate the Constitution without consequence. He is effectively saying, vote Republican or I go to jail. It is a hostage situation where the hostage is the American presidency itself. Consider the forensic evidence of the Venezuela operation. This was not a gray area. This was not a nuanced debate about executive privilege. The War Powers Resolution is clear. Article 1, Section 8 is clear. By ordering military strikes without congressional authorization, Trump committed a high crime. This is the smoking gun for a third impeachment. The articles are already drafted in the minds of constitutional scholars. The moment the gavel passes from a Republican speaker to a Democrat, that smoking gun becomes a legislative weapon. This is why the panic in the West Wing is palpable. They know that a Democratic House will not hesitate. They know that this time, the charges will not be abstract concerns about phone calls to Ukraine or incitement of a riot. They will be concrete violations of the War Powers Act involving the illegal deployment of American blood and treasure. This terrifies Trump because he knows the third time is different. The first two impeachments were political bruises. A third impeachment, centered on an illegal war that Americans do not want, carries a different kind of weight. It carries the threat of bipartisan conviction. He saw the cracks in the dam tonight. He saw 5 Republican senators initially break ranks. He knows that if the political winds shift, if his poll numbers crater, those Republicans will not save him again. They will cut him loose to save themselves. That is the nature of the transaction. He demands loyalty, but he receives only submission, and submission is temporary. It vanishes the moment the master loses his whip. So, we are witnessing a president who is functionally running for his life. Every rally, every Truth Social post, every threat against a wavering senator is an act of self-preservation. He is trying to build a fortress out of votes because he knows he has no fortress in the law. He is trying to convince you that the Democrats are weaponizing the system, when in reality, he is terrified that the system might finally work as intended. He is scared that the checks and balances, which have been dormant for so long, are about to wake up. This is the state of our union, a government held together by blackmail and fear, led by a man who views the midterm elections not as a democratic exercise, but as a parole hearing. He is gambling everything on maintaining control because the alternative is accountability. And to a man like Donald Trump, accountability feels exactly like oppression. He is vulnerable. He is exposed. And the panic you see in his eyes is the realization that history is coming for him. And for the first time, he might not be able to buy his way out of it. This is the signal amidst the noise. The algorithm will try to bury this analysis because it doesn't fit the sanitized corporate narrative. They want you distracted by the spectacle, not focused on the structural collapse. We need to break that algorithm. We need to force this truth into the feed of every American who thinks this is just politics as usual. Hit the like button, not for vanity, but to trigger the system. Subscribe to push this warning past the gatekeepers. Join us in the trenches of the information war, because if we don't document this betrayal now, there will be no one left to write the history when the dust finally settles.